Bob? But my name's Billy. It doesn't matter what your name is.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to week 6 of the Daily Hotpot. I am your co-host, Drift, aka Robbie.
And I am Khuon. Good morning, everyone. That was my announcer voice.
Perfect announcer voice because, ladies and gentlemen, if you didn't read the title of today's episode, for this wondrous Tuesday, we are going to be discussing the world of World Wrestling Entertainment or professional wrestling. Khuon, what is your experience, or lack thereof, of professional wrestling?
Literally zero experience out of my friends being into it in elementary school. I do know a couple of ones. What was it? The WWF? I think that was like the old one, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the difference between E and F, but I'm hoping you will clarify things for me.
I will. I guess, yeah, as you stated, you're not very familiar, or you have a very layman's familiarity with WWE. I think it was popular enough in the late 90s, early 2000s that like people are aware of it in the zeitgeist of culture. But beyond that, it's sweaty dudes in a ring.
Sweaty, naked dudes in a ring.
Half naked, let's be clear. Half naked dudes in the ring. As much as we'd like them to be naked. But comparatively to Khuon, I am a humongous wrestling fan, more so in my childhood. But for those of you that are unaware, there was a definite dark era in the world of professional wrestling during the late 2000s, and not late 2000s, but specifically the 2010s, deep into prior to COVID. Wrestling was, on the down end in terms of popularity. A lot of hardcore fans were dipping out of it, like myself. But recently, in the past 3 or 4 years, past COVID, professional wrestling is literally and statistically and monetarily the most popular it has been since the glory days of the Attitude Era, which is the late 90s, and the Ruthless Aggression Era, which is the early to late 2000s. And I
wonder how many people listening have any idea what you're talking about. We got storylines and plot lines and eras.
Yeah.
Very intriguing.
It is a crazy, crazy world, and I recently just got back into it, and the reason why I chose this topic for today is because just this past weekend was on Saturday, the WWE pay-per-view event called Backlash, which was held in France. And if you're unaware of wrestling and what the crowds are like, this is a very, very hard exception because European crowds are insane. But I just want you to go look up on YouTube Backlash 2024 France and look at like highlights of the crowd, and holy moly were they going fucking nuts. And that to me is the whole embodiment of professional wrestling. But besides that, just getting to the ground zero of, if you are not familiar with pro wrestling, I'm sure the big moniker for everyone is that it's not just like fake wrestling, everything's fake. That's the whole thing. Fake. And if people say this to wrestling fans as if it's like unleashing Pandora's box. Like you're telling them a world-shattering realization that is like, aha, gotcha. Didn't you know it's fake? Look, even my fucking 5-year-old fucking kids at like camp at work know that wrestling is predetermined and scripted, okay? If you think you're giving a gotcha to wrestling fans, I'm sorry, you're probably just as an idiot as other people, okay? Wrestling is very much what I like to call a highly athletic and beautiful live theater production. It is, in the same way that, someone might call wrestling fake. I don't waltz up to you watching Avengers Infinity War and say, hey, did you guys know? That's not Iron Man. That's Robert Downey Jr. Oh, by the way, that's actually not Thanos. That's a CGI double of Josh Brolin. Just wanted to tell you guys, sorry, it's fake. It's the same thing,
Yeah.
It's a
it actually makes me think a little bit. I wonder if like back in Roman times, like during the gladiator stuff, I wonder if it's scripted and kind of like the same format just to entertain the crowd or not.
That is interesting.
Supposedly not scripted and everything's kind of real, but just seeing how wrestling is like nowadays, the money that goes into it and, like the so-called promotions, I can guarantee like kind of like the same all the way back then. It's probably got a little bit of scripted to it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I mean, yeah, wrestling right now, it's always been scripted for the maximized entertainment. And I think that's the big thing. And even you mentioned it, with the change from the WWF to WWE was initially because it was called the World Wrestling Federation. And at some point, there was an event in wrestling history called the Curtain Call. And long story short, it was a group of wrestlers in the storyline of the WWE, which is called kayfabe. If you don't know the term kayfabe, it's an old carnival term where wrestling predates in the early 1900s, where carnival wrestling is the origins of wrestling, professional wrestling.
Ah.
And basically, they found that they made more money back in the early 1900s if they scripted and predicted matches or developed stories in matches and made direct outcomes that they can make definite stories and characters around. That grew and grew and grew into wrestling we know today. And back when it was the WWF, which was in the the 80s and the early 90s, it was called World Wrestling Federation. But they ran into an issue during this event called the Curtain Call, where in kayfabe, which is as I was mentioning, the current story of wrestling, it is the story that they're upholding for you to suspend your disbelief and believe in, and that's kayfabe. When a wrestler maintains kayfabe, that means they're maintaining character. They're staying in character. They are not, like for example, the wrestler Triple H. His real name is Paul Levesque, but in the ring, he's Triple H. His name's Paul Levesque, okay? That's his real name, but his character name is Triple H, Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And to maintain kayfabe, he must be in character. And essentially, during this very historic event in the WWE called the Curtain Call, he and another wrestler, Shawn Michaels, and another wrestler, Scott Hall, and another wrestler, Kevin Nash, they were feuding. And they were feuding in a wrestling match during a pay-per-view. And that's the whole storyline. They're supposed to fucking hate each other. Like, absolutely hate each other. But behind the stage, I mean, they're good friends. That's how most wrestlers are. They're playing a character. They're not really hate each other, but they need to make the crowd believe they do. At the end of a match between, I believe, Kevin Nash and Shawn Michaels, at the end, it was a going away match for the two wrestlers, Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, because they were going to a different company. So the other two wrestlers, Triple H and Shawn Michaels, come to the match, and at the end, with the crowd like, oh, it's over, the match is over, they all end up hugging each other because they're all good friends. And this gets caught on video, an old 90s videotape VHS, and it gets spread like fucking wildfire because everyone's like, what the fuck? Like, I thought these guys are supposed to hate each other, because the whole thing is that they're maintaining kayfabe, they're maintaining the story, and this basically dissolved and truly like put the nail in the coffin of wrestling trying to maintain the idea of it being real. It was past the Curtain Call, which eventually the WWE couldn't call itself the WWE, the World Wrestling Federation, in two parts, because there was a worldwide organization called like the Worldwide...
Yeah, Earth Panda.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah. I'm trying to remember exactly, but that one, and they couldn't call it that because they got sued. And then equally, they couldn't call it a World Wrestling Federation because they needed to legally, so people couldn't bet on it, because to treat it like an actual betting sport, because matches are predetermined, they couldn't relate it to a World Wrestling Federation and actually treat itself like a sport anymore, especially with the Curtain Call. So they changed themselves to the WWE, and ever since kind of the early 2000s, late 90s, they've been called the WWE. Because World Wrestling Entertainment, to differentiate from being a federation for a legal sport. And yeah, sorry, that was a big history lesson, but
no, that was all very interesting to me. I remember even as I don't know, a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, there was always a big debate between how fake wrestling is.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's people who watch it, but I never got into it. But I was definitely aware of the characters, or rather the wrestlers that were involved, because, kids, or at least boys, they always try to imitate famous wrestlers.
Oh, yeah.
Where we would go around doing the X, right? The Triple H X all the time, or The Rock. So I was vaguely aware of at least the famous figures, or Hulk Hogan. Yeah. So very interesting backstory and history for me.
Yeah, it's a whole deep world that you just get sucked into. And I mean, it's funny you say that you were doing the Triple H Shawn Michaels DX crotch chops, as it were. The suck it. Oh my boy.
I remember our school banned it.
Oh yeah, a lot of schools banned it.
Yeah. It was so prevalent towards amongst the kids. It's kind of, I guess it got ridiculous.
It absolutely got ridiculous. I mean, I can remember in elementary school, again, growing up in the early 2000s, DX was still popular. So people would just, I remember in elementary school, in the second grade, one of these kids, I'm forgetting his name, it started with a Z, but he was a young Middle Eastern kid and big fan of wrestling. I wasn't really friends with him, but the teacher was scolding him. And I remember she's like, oh, you need to go to the principal's office right now. And before he leaves, he turns around and gives the crotch chops and tells her to suck it, suck it. She freaking chased after him.
Oh my God. I mean, if you look at it in hindsight, that's probably the most fucking disrespectful taunt gesture a little kid can give you.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my god.
I mean, that was the whole development of the Attitude Era. So, I mean, like, just as another slight history lesson, I mean, the wrestling is obviously broken up into different eras. I am not quite familiar with, like, this 50s, 60s, 70s era of wrestling, but the 80s was called the Golden Era. That's when you have your Hulk Hogan's, your Ultimate Warriors, your Andre the Giants, these kind of phenoms of the Golden Era. Then it changes to, I believe, called the Evolution Era, where stars basically started to kind of just evolve into something different. It was no longer the big superheroes like a Hulk Hogan or the phenoms and world wonders of Andre the Giants. It was more kind of concrete characters, though they're still kind of gimmicky. Like Shawn Michaels during this era was the Heartbreak Kid, and Bret Hart was Bret the Hitman Hart. And then from there, it changed into low-key the gimmick era, but really changed into the Attitude Era. And this was when stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin arrived, where basically he broke the mold for wrestlers, because at the time, everyone was still fairly gimmicky. It was during the gimmick era where you had fucking wrestlers like the Yeti, who was a giant mummy, but they called him the Yeti. He was fucking wrapped. There was one wrestler, I'm forgetting what he's called now, but it was a wrestler who was a stormtrooper helmet on that was bedazzled, and he was called, like, I don't even remember. And there's like, they had like a minotaur as a wrestler. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, the gimmicks they were developing in the early 90s was honestly stupid. But a wrestler like Stone Cold Steve Austin came in during the mid 90s and broke into the Attitude Era, because basically fans were starting to grow tired of the corporatization and the very, you know, caricature characters of wrestling that always defined it. So Stone Cold came in, and he was a no-nonsense dude who basically was fuck the authority, and he was just a straight killer. Like, Stone Cold Steve Austin was just a bald Texan dude who wanted to kick ass and drink beers. That was his whole thing. It was like, I'm just gonna kick your ass, I'm gonna drink beers and flip off everybody, and always had these amazing catchphrases. I mean, like, he'd always say, and that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so, or he'd just flip people off and hit him with a Stone Cold Stunner, drown them in beer. People fucking loved it. And it kicked off the era where, for example, D-Generation X, DX would give people crotch chops. The more raunchier, the further they went, the more anti-social norms and respect. And that's when The Rock came around and, you know, would just, you know, be a great heel and tell people, like, you know, oh, do you think you're a great wrestler? Yeah. It doesn't matter what you think. Oh, like all these wrestlers.
Oh my god, that happens so much. Every time fucking someone's trying to talk, it doesn't matter.
Oh, all these catchphrases entering, you know, the nomenclature of you know, the times for the youth. It was crazy. And yeah, there's just so many. I mean, I have so many wrestlers growing up, and it's just such an amazing thing. And I was explaining this to our friend Nick. You guys don't know Nick? He's a German guy. And I was telling him, I was like, wrestling is so interesting because it's one of the I think actually not one of, it's probably the only, as far as I understand, the only medium of storytelling where every single character in it and every storyline is happening in real time. In the sense that, you know, if you watch any show, even if it's like a day-to-day show, what is it called? Reality show. Even though they show you relatively minute to minute what's going on, the timeline within they're showing you the media is whatever the camera shows you. And obviously that is true for wrestling, you know, you watch it on TV. But if a week happens for us, a week happens for Triple H, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, The Rock. There is no jump in timeline to a month later or whatever. Like every week to week when they have episodes of Raw, SmackDown, NXT, a week passes by for these characters. A day, every second, every hour passes. And these storylines that literally span years are told. And some of the most beautiful, heart-wrenching, or amazing stories that I have ever seen, heard, or experienced have been told during wrestling because they happen in real time. That's why you get these like fanatic wrestling fans or these intense emotional moments watching your favorites, like, you know, have their final match, like when The Undertaker retired, because you literally watch him from when you're a kid and watch his 30-year career progress, and you're seeing this character in real time. And I even joked with Nick, I said, you know, wrestling's low-key like anime. Everyone has signature moves and finishers. It's,
you know what? It really is like anime. That's like, speaking of Undertaker, he's the one that like goes behind people, right?
Yeah, like the lights will shut off
with the smoke.
Yeah.
I've always loved that. Actually, that was so low key funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the few wrestlers that survived the gimmick era, because his whole gimmick is he's this undead Western Undertaker, and you're like, the term is called getting over with the fans, right? And it means like, you know, can you get your character and your style? Can you get the fans to like you? And you think about it and go like, how the fuck did this motherfucker get the idea of an undead mortician Western wizard guy over with the fans and have a 30-year long career? And it's insane. I mean, yeah, there's so many wrestling terms. Like, do you know what a heel is?
I do, but why don't you tell the audience?
Okay. You don't know what a heel is. A heel is the bad guy in any sort of match or story in wrestling. And a heel, again, is supposed to be someone that the crowd loves to hate. It's supposed to draw the ire of the crowd. Is someone who does dirty moves or, spits in the face of the crowd, the person who you're supposed to root against. And on the other end is the term the face or the baby face. It's the guy the crowd's supposed to love, is supposed to cheer. It's supposed to draw, sales for the kids buying their fucking little action figures. The face is very important, and that balance and dichotomy is super
What's a
important.
couple of examples?
Oh, yeah. To cover back on the other one, a good example of a heel would be someone like Edge, or someone like, what's a better one? Triple H was a heel for a lot of his career. And he's a legend because of it. And what's another good heel? Gold Dust. That's an iconic wrestler that normal people won't know the name of, but will remember that they saw. It's a dude who's covered in gold and black.
Yeah.
And example of a face is Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Cody Rhodes right now. All those people that are just you're supposed to root for. And it's a weird thing where people think, oh, so they're a face. That means they're a good guy. Like there's someone who is like a honky-dory hero and is supposed to fight for good. But then you go like, wait, but you said Stone Cold and The Rock are faces, but those dudes, for all intents and purposes are assholes. How are they considered faces? And, that's definitely of the time and of the era, of the Attitude Era, where people loved to cheer for the person who was just more hardcore. Someone who just said, fuck you, I stand for me and my character and whatever. And it's definitely a weird scenario. Are you aware of the wrestler Roman Reigns?
No, who's that?
So Roman Reigns is a Samoan wrestler who is the cousins of The Rock. And recently, he just lost his championship at WrestleMania 40, which was like the biggest WrestleMania to date recently. And he was the fourth longest reigning undisputed WWE champion for 1,300 something days, almost eclipsing Hulk Hogan. And he reigned for 4 years, but this was a long process. He during that 4-year reign was a heel, someone that the crowd loved to hate. And loved is correct because, he drew the ire of the crowd, but he got cheers and attention because, people love to hate him. And that's the thing. Like, you're a bad heel if people hate you, but like hate you in such a way that they don't like. Though it's a weird balance, right? You could be a really good heel if people genuinely hate you and want to fucking kill you and send you death threats. But it's another way where you kind of get over with the crowd and they hate you, but like, man, I hate you, but I fucking love this guy. That was Roman Reigns.
Yeah. Okay.
But earlier in his career, during the late 2010s, it was really bad for Roman Reigns because they tried to make him a babyface. He was part of this faction called The Shield. They were a bunch of like military type dudes, like secret security, kick your ass type guys. Long story short, the faction that he was in broke up, and the WWE saw him as the next face of the company because John Cena, it's John Cena. Everyone knows John Cena. He was on his way out of the company and they needed someone new to push action figures to be the face of the company. They saw Roman Reigns. He's a really humongous, strong, handsome looking Samoan dude. And they said, okay, we're going to push him, give him a big company push. We're going to put him in big matches against big stars, have him win those, and the people are going to love it. And Roman Reigns was so shoved into the people's throats that even though he was the babyface that everyone was trying to root for, if you look back at those old matches, and there's like a whole video covering it by a channel called Super Eye Patch Wolf. It's fantastic. I think it's called The Unreality of Pro Wrestling. But he was fucking hated. I mean, downright despised. I mean, every match, every time he took a step in the ring, people booed him. And I mean, not like a heel boo where it's like, ooh, boo, you're doing great things. Like, they're like, no, dude, get this motherfucker off my screen. I don't want to pay money to watch this guy. And yeah, he was absolutely lauded and hated for. And the thing is, he was not the greatest wrestler early on in his career, but he was getting better and better and better. But he'd draw chants from the crowds, loud chants from the crowds during pay-per-views like you suck, or like, oh, this is boring, or this is awful. And I remember one time in the later 2010s when he wrestled against Brock Lesnar, another famous wrestler, and he had improved. He genuinely had improved, but the crowd still hated him. I remember when he won that match, or during the whole match at WrestleMania, crowds were still chanting, you still suck. you still suck the whole
That's so
time.
tough, man. That's so tough as like someone who's there and whose job is to entertain the crowd
Hmm.
and just not having the crowd with you, either in like a villain or a hero way. Must be tough on him.
It was really tough, and the toughest part about it is after that run, I think just before COVID, or I think in 2018, he had to retire from wrestling for a short period of time because he came out to the crowd on a random episode of, I think, Raw, which is one of the shows for WWE. And he came out to the crowd and basically talked to them not as Roman Reigns, but as himself, Joe Ananoe, I think is his real name. And he said, "Look, I'm not going to talk to you as Roman Reigns. I'm talking to the crowd as Joe." And again, during this whole segment when he's talking to the crowd, he's getting boos. Then he comes out and says, "Whether you booed me or you cheered me, like, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, but I have to relinquish." At the time, he had the WWE title. He said, "I have to relinquish the title because for the past 7 years, I've been fighting leukemia."
What?
No, like, this is real. Like, this isn't kayfabe.
I
This
know.
is like,
That's like,
yeah,
what a twist.
what a twist. And he basically said, "Yeah, I've been fighting leukemia and it's back, and I have to relinquish the title and step away from WWE." And members from his old faction after that segment came to hug him, and like there's all this behind the scenes of showing like all the wrestlers in the back like giving him a hug and sending him off. And as he was leaving the stage, the crowd finally kind of slow turned and they started cheering, "Thank you, Roman, da 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 da, thank you, Roman." And basically he was gone for like years until during COVID, he came back and kind of revamped his character. Basically, the WWE kind of gave up on his whole babyface push run, and they were like, he's like, "Nah, give me creative control of my character." And they're like, "All right, you know what? This whole babyface thing did not work out. Fine." And he basically became a heel. He became like a bloodthirsty man on a mission. And he had like matches against his cousins, the Usos, who were like twins, who were in a tag team match. And he basically became like a fucking Samoan mob boss. They formed a faction called the Bloodline, and they went through a whole story of how he beat his cousins to a pulp, forcing them to become of the Bloodline. And he basically became like this manipulative mob boss where he like slowly grew the Samoan faction. And there's like this whole 4-year story of the Bloodline built up to this most recent WrestleMania with this other wrestler, Cody Rhodes, who just took the championship from him. That's a whole other story with Cody Rhodes, where basically he comes from a wrestling family, with his dad being Dusty Rhodes, a Hall of Famer legend, his brother being Dustin Rhodes, which is his in-ring name was Gold Dust, the fucking gold guy. But
that guy. Okay,
yeah.
okay.
His whole dad's story was that he never became a WWE champion because he got screwed by the company. And the McMahons, which is the family that runs WWE, admittedly Vince McMahon, which is the patriarchal head of the family who ran WWE for so long, I think most people knew that he had a vendetta against the Rhodes family. And whenever they joined the company for WWE, he always made them completely like humiliating roles. Like, for example, Dusty Rhodes wrestled for another company in the late 80s, early 90s, and he was a hot sensation. He came over to the WWE, and basically Vince McMahon turned his whole character around into some silly fat dude. And when Dustin Rhodes, Cody Rhodes' brother and Dusty Rhodes' son, Dustin, he came to the company, he turned him into Gold Dust, this freaking sexual heel gold laden like painted man. And
I've seen clips of him.
Yeah.
Yes. That description is right.
Very accurate, if you guys ever want to look that up. And then when Cody Rhodes joined the company, he kind of wrestled under the tutelage of his dad and his brother Dustin at the time. And he was normal, relatively. He had normal matches. He was dashing Cody Rhodes, because Cody Rhodes is a very attractive man. But then, partway through his career with the WWE, Vince McMahon changed his whole role to become Stardust. Basically like a tag team with his brother Dustin, who is Gold Dust. And it was just, I don't know. It was a very humiliating role for both of them. And eventually, Cody Rhodes left the company because he said, "You know what? You guys don't have a creative role for me. I'm going to build my career elsewhere." He goes over to Japan. He goes over to another wrestling organization. And then he makes a wrestling organization called AEW, which is currently the biggest contender to the WWE right now.
Wait, he made his own?
Yeah, he started a wrestling like organization and televised thing with another group of wrestlers. So then that happens. They build up as a contender to WWE, and eventually he starts falling out of favor in AEW, which is the one he built. They start, not having any good stories for him. Though he's one of the founders, he doesn't wrestle as much. And eventually in 2022, he joins WWE again. But this time around, with Vince McMahon not being sort of part of head of the company anymore, and this time bringing back Triple H, he is now the head of creative relations with WWE. They bring back Cody
Hmm.
Rhodes, and they don't bring him back as Stardust. They bring Cody Rhodes back as his American Nightmare persona. It was a persona that he built in Japan and AEW and all these other independent routes. And don't worry, it's not like fucking Undertaker where it's like some fucking demon guy. It's just American Nightmare. He's just an American. It's just like a hardcore American icon, kind of like a badass American look. But kind of this regal look. It's not gimmicky. It's not as silly as like a character. It's just more of a title. They bring him back, and his whole arc in the WWE is now like, I've come back to WWE to finish my family story, is to win the WWE title. And he has a big feud with the Bloodline, which is Roman Reigns' whole mob boss fucking manipulation organization. And they feud at WrestleMania 39. He loses. And then WrestleMania 40 this year, he rematches him again. But then he starts the whole year, spends time building allies because he's not part of a faction himself, and he's facing a whole bloodline faction of Samoans. He's wrestling, building a rapport with other wrestlers, getting allies during the storyline, and basically WrestleMania 40 climaxes into a humongous Avengers Endgame climax. Bloodline versus Cody Rhodes and his allies, and Cody Rhodes finally wins, achieving the undisputed wrestling championship that his family never had. And it was one of the best WrestleManias in history, and brought back so many fans. And honestly, it is the reason why I'm back into wrestling today, and what prompted this episode. And that was, wow.
Yeah, that's, I don't know, just listening to it, I can sense the hype, like the week by week buildup, especially now that you mention it, there's like two different contenders or two different factions kind of like getting together for like a big payoff. So just from you talking about it, I can definitely understand like the hype building up that accumulated to a big event.
Yeah, it was a huge buildup, and it paid off. And yeah, I'm back in it now. I got some buddies. Me and them are back into watching WWE together. We all kind of got launched back into it. But yeah, that's my whole WWE thing. I mean, I've talked for a long time. I'm looking at the timer now. Yeah, I just needed time to vent and talk about the resurgence of WWE in my life. I know Khuon, you didn't have much to talk about here, but yeah.
I mean, wrestling in general, like as a subculture, has produced so many very well-known and famous entertainers, like even movie stars. So it's interesting that the skills they got from being a pro wrestler translated into like other forms of entertainment. Like you have like The Rock, or you have recently, what's his name, Bautista, I think.
Bautista, yeah.
The half Asian guy. Yeah, they're like making moves in like the other entertainment world.
Yeah, a lot of WWE stars definitely pushed into the acting scene. I think Rock and Bautista are probably the only real successful ones. I think others have had minor roles in movies and stuff.
I mean, I watch a lot of B movies, right? Like B action movies.
Okay.
They're definitely in there.
Oh, they are.
They're sometimes, yeah. So it's like very interesting the skills that they get, because they're acting, they're performing, and they're obviously physically fit and are able to perform in these action movies. I think like they're like the perfect fit to be action movie stars.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's definitely the key genre for them. But yeah, a welcome returned part of my life, and it's good to be back in the zeitgeist of the Wrestleverse. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
I can understand a little bit of how you feel while watching the event. Not the same, but unrelated. Occasionally, I go to medieval times, right?
Yeah.
Or if I go to like a Renaissance fair, there's always like jousting tournaments, or like tournaments where you pick a knight that you are a champion for, and it's always interesting to see like the crowd cheer for their own knight, even though they know nothing about the knight. But just like the hype you get into like cheering for someone and watching them win or lose. And there's always like a bad knight too, like an evil knight. I don't know, so I get it. I could definitely understand like the entertainment value and the investment you get emotionally while watching these events.
Yeah, I think you know what, Khuon, that's the next step. They just need to put pro wrestling storytelling, but just start a new company with a bunch of knights in gladiatorial arenas. We'll sell out.
Well, they do that. There are like in, I don't know, certain European countries and like Canada, they have full armor sporting events, but low key they do look kind of lame.
No.
But imagine if like pro wrestling started to add like weapons and shit. I don't know. I don't know. Very interesting.
Well, folks, that is all I got to blabber about. I know it's a long Tuesday pod about me yapping about pro wrestling, but hopefully you guys found that interesting. Khuon, do you have anything else to tell the people today?
Yeah, no, I'm actually curious about what you mentioned before about how in like the late 2000s wrestling died down. I wonder if that had a lot to do with the rise of like UFC or like mixed martial arts. And then like I've noticed that recently, last couple of years, people don't particularly care too much about UFC. It's not as hyped as it was back in like the late 2000s and early 2010s. So it's interesting the flip flop between the two form of martial arts entertainment.
Yeah, I think those are definitely coincided. But yeah, it is an interesting thing to watch, an interesting thing to keep an eye on, especially this kind of ebb and flow between the real combat sports and the entertainment sports for sure. But yeah, well, thank you guys so much for listening to this week's pod, and hopefully I didn't yap your ear off, and Khuon hopefully doesn't want to die. So, with that being said, hopefully you guys have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you tomorrow for another morning pod. And as always, take it easy.
Bye.